Light a campfire and everyone's a storyteller. Join us for some thought-provoking and beyond fireside chats.
So I am sitting here with Panthera's Director of the Leopard Program, Guy Balme. Guy, thank you so much for joining us this morning at Beyond Tingile River Lodge to chat. We're basically here to find out a little bit more about you, what you do, Panthera's relationship with Beyond, and a little bit about the conservation work that Panthera's done.
Thanks, Josh. Morning. It's good to be here.
Oh, good to have you here. So I'm going to jump right in, Guy, and the first question I have for you is, what is Panthera, and in a nutshell, and what are their main aims or objectives?
Sure. So Panthera is a charity which is based in New York, but which funds, oversees, and implements projects on wildcat conservation all over the world. So our mission is to secure a future for the world's cats. And we work in Asia, we do work on tigers and snow leopards, in Latin America on jaguars, in North America on mountain lions, and then here in Africa on lions, cheetahs, and leopards.
So basically on all the iconic cat species of the world.
All the iconic cat species, as well as the smaller cat species. We have a growing small cat program now, and so we work on all those cat species, and obviously on the landscapes where they live. You can't just protect cats, you need to also look after their habitat, the prey that they need, and so we take a holistic approach to that.
That's fantastic. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your history as well. You were a guide at and Beyond Phinda Private Game Reserve, and I think you mentioned you worked here briefly in the Sabi Sands as well. Tell us a bit about your story and how you came to find your passion for big cats or for leopards.
Sure. So I've always loved the bush. I think since I was a little kid, I was always going to work in the bush in conservation. I was very fortunate in that I have my family run a lodge here in the Sabi Sands, and so I was able to visit this area from when I was just a wee little sprog. And then I went on to study at UCT. So I studied Bachelor of Science in Zoology, and I'd just done my honours. And though I wanted to carry on with an academic career, I just needed to get a bush fix. And so
Fair enough,
as most, I think, any sane person would want. But so I contacted And Beyond, and I went on their ranger course, and I was posted at Phinda. Thrilled about it. I'd always heard about Phinda. It just sounded like an amazing reserve. And basically the deal I'd arranged with my then supervisor at UCT is that I would be able to come and guide for 2 years, and then I'd head back to UCT to do a PhD, but on birds. So initially I was...
Oh, wow. So you were initially going to be doing something on birds.
Absolutely. And so I was a budding ornithologist, and not just any bird. It was a very dull, boring bird, an African sedge warbler that I was lined up to do a PhD on. So I'd been guiding at Phinda for almost a year then, and an opportunity came up to basically be part of a new leopard research program that And Beyond and Panthera. Then it wasn't actually Panthera, it was the Wildlife Conservation Society, but soon taken over Panthera, wanting to establish, and this just sounded amazing, so I applied. Somehow managed to get the job, and then had the very awkward conversation with my supervisor saying that I was no longer going to be working on sedge warblers, but on leopards. They've never forgiven me. They basically think that I drop birds for the glory of big cats. I try to tell them that almost everywhere in the world where I work on cats, you never get to see the damn things, but I can always bird watch, so I get the best of both. But
well, the next time we're out, we'll have to point out some birds and not just the tracks of leopards.
Josh, I've got rusty since then, I'm afraid. But yeah, so that's how it all started. So I guess it was almost an accident that I landed up working on leopards, but that was almost 20 years ago, and I have loved every moment since.
Awesome. And speaking of And Beyond, your time there and Beyond and Panthera, can you give us sort of a brief history of the relationship between And Beyond and Panthera?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first boss and my PhD supervisor was an Australian by the name of Dr. Luke Hunter. And Luke had done his PhD on Phinda when it was first formed. So Luke had worked on the reintroduction of lions and cheetah into Phinda. At that time, we knew very little about how to reintroduce cats into reserves. Now it's a sort of a tried and tested method, but it really was. It was pioneered by by and beyond. I think in those early days it was called Conscorp, but so it was pioneered by the work that people like Les Carlisle and Luke did, bringing these cats in and working out how to ensure that they could successfully survive in a new environment. And so that is where the relationship, I guess, grew. After that, Luke left. He headed back to Australia and had worked in academia for a while, and then, like I say, joined up with the Wildlife Conservation Society. And Kevin Pretorius, who was the reserve manager at Panthera at that time, reached out to Luke and said that they had concerns about the leopard population. They were worried about some of the persecution in neighbouring areas, and would he be interested in carrying on with his work on cats in the reserve, but here looking at what impacts that persecution was having on Panthera's leopards, and how could we rectify that situation. And then I stepped in as the very keen and willing research assistant to Luke. So that's where I guess the relationship, how it's grown, and it's just continued from there onwards over the years.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you've mentioned the persecution of leopards in that area, and it leads very nicely into my next question for you. And I think most people who work for and beyond in some way, shape or form have heard about the documentary To Skin a Cat. And so I wanted to ask you, one of the most notable successes for Panthera in recent times is the relationship built with the Shembe Church. And I wanted to ask about the documentary To Skin a Cat and the influence that this has had on leopard conservation in that region in KwaZulu-Natal.
Okay, so I guess just to go back to sort of like I say, when the project first started, we didn't actually know what the main drivers of the population decline in Panthera was. What was causing leopards, the numbers just to continually decrease there.
And sorry to interrupt you, Guy, how did you originally know that the numbers were decreasing? Was it through like camera trap surveys or?
So initially through anecdotal evidence just from the guides, they would habituate a cat and finally start being able to view leopards in that area, and then that cat would disappear. And then that process happened again and again and again. So we started the more intensive research to try to find out, okay, what's going on. We put radio collars on lots of leopards. At that stage, it was by far the most extensive research program that ever happened on the species. We called it over 70 leopards in the end. We also ran camera trap surveys to be able to estimate leopard population densities, and then because we repeated these every 2 years, we could see how the population trend changed, how numbers changed over time, and it soon became very clear that the population was in steep decline, literally in free fall, and we were able to work out why, because we had this sort of this intensive data on how long leopards were living for, and when they died, what was the cause of death. And we were, interestingly, in the early years, it seemed to be more related to just poorly managed trophy hunting and problem animal control. And so we took that evidence, we took the data, and we worked with the provincial authority in the area, which is Izimvelo KwaZulu-Natal Wildlife, and they absorbed all this information, and they changed their policies, which had an unbelievable effect on the leopard population. As soon as hunting and problem animal control policies changed, we saw numbers started to rebound. So within a few years, that Panthera population had almost doubled in size, but then it started to drop off again, and this seemed to be due to other reasons. And again, just because we continued the research, that program ran for over 10 years.
Wow.
So we were able to see now it was more poaching of leopards, so snaring of cats, targeted poisoning of cats, which was causing this now, again, repeated decline. And when we did some further investigation, we found out that the reasons that leopards were being poached was primarily for their skins, so that there was real demand for leopard skins amongst different ethnic groups here in South Africa for ceremonial wear. So leopards have always played a very important role in some cultures. The wearing of leopard skins is a sort of symbol of power, of prestige.
Yeah, usually something for the royals or for leaders, I guess.
Exactly. So it used to be limited to just a few individuals, but unfortunately those cultural taboos on who could and couldn't wear leopard skins has changed over time, and now almost anyone is wearing these skins, and this was really evident with a religious group known as the Nazareth Baptist Church or Shembe Church. They had adopted leopards as their totem species. They wore leopard skins as a symbol of worship, and and there are literally millions of Shembe worshippers. So this was a problem for leopards. Demand was very high, and this is what was causing this, like I say, marked increase in poaching for the cats. And so you asked about the documentary Films for Life. Well, a colleague of mine that was working with me at Panthera at the time, he then sort of delved into this project and problem, I should say, which turned into the Furs for Life project. And Tristan Dickerson started working with the Shembe leadership, trying to find out, like I say, the motivations for the use of leopard skins. Were there alternatives? And he soon realized that when one visited these Shembe gatherings, that you would see that some Shembe members were celebrating, were dancing using fake skins. They just couldn't afford a real leopard skin. And that led us on to this idea, maybe we could replace all the real skins being used by the Shembes with a synthetic alternative. And so started the Furs for Life program, and the documentary To Skin a Cat basically shows the sort of progress that we made over the years. It also shows why conservationists should never get involved in fashion. I think what could have taken us to develop this synthetic garment, it's termed an amabata. It's a shoulder cape that Shembe members wear. To develop that, probably if we'd gone to an expert, could have taken us 6 months. It took us about 5 years to get a cost-effective and realistic-looking alternative
to leopard skins.
But it's been amazing, and because of this very close relationship that we have with the Shembe leadership, because they've bought into the project, they've endorsed it,
and the trust that you've built together.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't something that we tried to force on them. This wasn't a prescribed solution to it. We sort of worked together to say, okay, how can we address this? This is not sustainable. This sort of demand for thousands of leopards every year. Soon there would be no more of these cats left.
I think that's maybe another reason why Ambient and Panthera work so well together, because it's kind of alternatives for the people, by the people, if that makes sense. So it wasn't like you were just forcing things upon them, but more communicating with them directly and saying, how can we fix this together?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very close partnership, and I've realized, I think when I first got into work in conservation, I thought I'd be working with animals, and I realize all the time, if you want to make any significant inroads in conservation, it's all about people. It's about changing human behaviors. So maybe I got involved in the wrong job in the end, but I should have been a guide. I should carry on as a guide. But no, and
we can switch places if you like.
Yeah,
I don't think I'd have quite the same candor as you, but
I don't know. Well, if I had this office, I'm all for that. It's been a remarkable project, because so now we've donated, I think as of this year, about 19,000 of these faux skins to Shembe members, and you could almost think about it as every skin is a leopard saved.
Yeah, for sure.
And it is very rare in conservation that you have a nice, neatly packaged solution to a problem. Most of the time, it's sort of conservation is all about these wicked issues or wicked problems. It's about,
and something has to give, doesn't it? I mean, maybe the most amazing thing about this is that you allowed a cultural and religious group to maintain their beliefs and traditions whilst also saving the leopard.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lovely mix of the two to be able to ensure that everyone won in this situation. And don't get me wrong, it's no silver bullet. This on its own, the faux skins on its own, doesn't solve the problem, and we still have to. We do a lot of work on educational outreach with Shembe members, working with our conservation leaders in South Africa with regards to policy and the use of skins. So it still has to be part of a broader package, but it was a remarkable success. How we gauge our impact on how much of the demand we've reduced is we go to Shembe gatherings and we record the ratio of how many authentic skins there are to fake skins. And when we first started going to Shembe gatherings in 2013-14, for every fake skin that we would see 8 authentic skins. Now, when we go to a Shembe gathering, they're typically at parity. We see 1 fake skin for 1 authentic skin. And slowly but surely that ratio, soon we'll start seeing more fake skins to authentic skins. So
swinging in a favorable direction.
Absolutely. And so that's a really good indication that we seem to have achieved our objective. We seem to have been able to reduce demand amongst the user group, amongst the Shembe. And then if we look at camera trap surveys in different parts of the country, we can also see how populations have started to rebound. So much like Panthera, when we changed the policies around hunting, problem animal control, We were able to see how leopards could respond. Here we see it at a national scale. So leopard populations across South Africa are starting to recover because some of the pressure has been taken off. And it's one of the things I really love about working with cats is how quickly they can recover if the situation allows them to. So as long as conditions are suitable, they can respond and recover rapidly. I mean, if you're looking at slower-lived animals like rhinos or elephants, that's much harder. It takes a long time to see any changes in a population. Leopards, we get, like I say, if we get the right mix, you get a very rapid return. You can see your impact very quickly, which is heartening.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And so, I mean, that's just one of the one of the most notable projects that Panthera has done, and just the tip of the iceberg, really, with some of the conservation work that you guys do. Bringing it back to the Sabi Sands, why is and beyond Kirkman's Camp, and really this entire region, why is it so ideal for studying leopards?
When we'd finished the project at Panthera, so that ran for 10 years, from 2002 to 2012. So we radio collared a lot of cats. At that time it was the seminal study on the species, and we had learned a great deal about leopards, and we'd been able to use that information to change policy, to improve conservation practices. But there were still huge gaps in our knowledge of the species. And ultimately, if you want to protect an animal, you need to know about it. You need to know all the ins and outs about its behavior, its ecology, its evolution. And because I had always known about the Sabi Sands, like I say, I have a family history here. I've known about these incredibly relaxed leopards, and importantly about how well documented the individual cats had been by the different guides and lodges. I realized that we had an opportunity to plug some of those holes in our knowledge about leopards. And so I started reaching out to different guides from and beyond and other lodges in the region, and slowly but surely starting to reconstruct the life histories of the different individual leopards which have been tracked over the last 40 plus years. So dating right back to the late 70s.
That's an incredible amount of data.
Yeah, unbelievable. And it was and it's far gone beyond anything that we expected to achieve here in this project. So just to give you an indication, we now have life history data. So we know exactly when individuals were born, died, for the most part, what happened to them for over 850 leopards.
Wow,
we have spatial data. So we have the locations for more than 90,000 sightings, over 10,000 leopard kills, and comparable data on the other large carnivores in the system. So on lions, on wild dog, on cheetahs. And so it's not just the leopards, but their competitors. We have good data on the prey. So it has been a remarkable research project, which is all on the bat of ecotourism, of guides collecting the information for us. And so it's done very cheaply, but it's rigorous. And
it's very intensive, isn't it? I mean, you get almost every little last single detail.
Absolutely, and information we would never be able to achieve using other, research methods such as radio telemetry or camera trapping. So it's a unique opportunity, and now certainly one of the leading cat studies, not just leopard studies. It's well surpassed what we did at Panthera, at least from a research perspective. But among all cat projects, there's probably only maybe 2 or 3 other cat studies on lions and cheetah which come close to rivaling just the length of time that or the number of generations that we've been able to follow, and the number of different individuals. So, and this long-term data really does give us insight into population drivers. What regulates leopard populations? And we need that information here in a controlled system where leopards are really well protected, when they are behaving like leopards should do. And this is now the exception, not the norm anymore. This really is. It's probably one of the few leopard populations in the world. Now, if you think leopards occur across much of sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, this is maybe a handful or a dozen leopard populations which are occurring naturally. For the most part now, leopards are impacted by humans, but we need to have that control. We need to have a reference population to know what they would do in natural circumstances, to know, okay, what should we be aiming for? What is our conservation goal? This is our benchmark. And so not only do we learn about the drivers, about leopard populations through our intensive research here, but we also know what we need to be aiming towards.
How to apply it to other places and
absolutely
other leopard populations.
Absolutely.
Oh, fantastic. I should have probably asked this question earlier, actually, but I'm going to ask it now. And I wanted to know, why would you say that leopards are such an important species to conserve?
Because they're rad.
It's a good answer. I think most of the guides here would agree.
Josh, no. So leopards, I guess, like many apex predators, they are what is termed an umbrella species. They if you protect leopards, you're protecting a vast amount of other species, other forms of wildlife, biodiversity underneath them. They need large tracts of land to be able to be protected. They fulfill a key role in ecosystems that sort of right at the top of the food web. So you have these knock-on effects. If you can successfully conserve carnivores, just by virtue, you are looking after a whole host of other animals and plants, but below them. And so they really do. They fulfill a very important role as an umbrella species. Leopards are from a conservation sense, a useful model to use for different conservation approaches, because they occur both inside and outside of protected areas, and they often occur in much closer proximity to people than many other large carnivores. So they really are right at the interface of some of the conservation challenges, the conflicts that we face when trying to look after other large carnivores. And so that means we can test different approaches using leopards would be much harder with things like tigers, which are more endangered, more isolated to sort of protected areas. The same is true for lions, etc. So not only are they important umbrella species, they're an important species for allowing us to test different types of conservation interventions.
I mean, of course, you guys can't use exactly what you find on the leopards and consider it to be true for other things, but it certainly gives you a very good idea of how perhaps to go about conserving some of these other species, as you say, that occur in such close conflict with people.
Absolutely. So a lot of the conservation challenges that we face are common among the different cat species, among different large carnivores. It comes down to competing with people, posing threats to people's lives and livelihoods. And so, leopards give us a very useful opportunity to be able to test those conservation approaches. And don't get me wrong, they're not just a test case. We really do need to, like I say, we really do need to implement effective conservation interventions for leopards themselves in their own right. Kirkman's in this area is unique, as I said. This is one of the few places where the cats are effectively protected. For the most part, they're not. And we've seen that across leopard range, populations are in real trouble, and probably as much trouble as other more endangered species that we, I guess, are people might be more aware of, things like lions, tigers, rhinos. All of these species are very much in the public limelight, and people are aware that there are conservation issues with these particular species. But with leopards, they often seem to fall off the conservation radar. It is almost assumed that because they can survive in closer proximity with people, that their conservation status is assured. It doesn't really matter what happens, they will be able to bounce back. But as our information about leopard populations improve, we realize that this is not the case, that in many places they're in trouble.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that the leopards, you feel like they aren't necessarily in the limelight. And from a guest perspective, what's been quite interesting to see over the past sort of 4 or 5 years is, like, a lot of people will come on safari and they'll ask to see, lions. Lions is always a big one. So like you say, they're very much in the limelight and their struggles are in the limelight. But initially, even when people come to this area, they don't necessarily ask to see a leopard. And part of that is because of, I think, maybe the leopard's elusive nature. So they don't come here thinking we're definitely going to see one. They come here thinking leopards will be tricky to see. But more and more, we're starting to see leopards really rise to the fore of this iconic species that they should be. People come here, and one of the first things that they say when we ask them, what are you hoping to see on your safari, is a leopard. And so I think, like you say, it's great that we're finally bringing leopards and their struggles to the limelight. I think, guiding guests here is just one of those ways that we can bring them to the limelight.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's probably one of the reasons they were neglected is because, as you said, that elusive nature. People would never expect it to be able to see it, and it's taken decades here in the Sabi Sands to be able to get the cats habituated enough that you can have such regular sightings. It's remarkable. I think it's a it's wonderful that the Kirkmans, that this area, this reserve, is not only the place where, I guess, leopard viewing is at its best, and where you've been able to bring leopards back up into public awareness, but it's also now with the science and the sort of partnership we have with And Beyond and the other lodges, it's where we're learning most about the species. So this has been the platform for a great deal of leopard science, of leopard conservation, leopard public awareness, the whole lot. It really is. It's done a massive amount for the species.
And so we've spoken a lot about how, I guess, for lack of a better term, accessible the leopards are to our viewing here. We can see them and we can collect data on them, which we send to you guys. With the recent studies that you're doing in this area, can you give us a brief summary of the kind of data you're looking to collect, and maybe the kind of papers you're looking to write, if that's the right way to ask it? What are you here collecting at the moment?
Sure. We have different types of data that we collect through the project, all done by the guides for the most part. Each of the lodges, when they go out on game drive, the guides will take note of when they see leopards and other large carnivores for that matter, and when they return, we've developed a customized software. So the guides, they come, they will record all the key information that we require. So which individual was seen, where was it seen, did they kill something, did they interact with another individual? And so we're getting standardized data from all the different lodges across the reserve on all sightings. And like I say, that it's remarkable how many sightings there are. So on average, there's about 10,000 leopard sightings in the Sabi Sands each year.
Unbelievable. That's a lot of leopard sightings.
It is a lot of leopard sightings. And so that tells us, it gives us very important demographic information. So how often are leopards breeding? How often do they have litters? How many of those cubs survive? What are the survival rates of adults? What are the main causes of mortality? Also important spatial data. So we can work out the size of leopards' home ranges, if they are preferring or avoiding particular type of habitats, how they interact with other carnivores and their prey within the system. So that gives us some of the important behavioral and ecological data. Then to look at the population data, we run camera trap surveys. So we deploy camera traps, and we have across the whole reserve, and that tells us more about what is the density of leopards in this area. How does density vary across the reserve with regards to different vegetation types, to distance to water, etc., things like that. Also very useful information about leopard activity, because game drives only operate at a certain time of day. We get a biased look at what is happening with leopards around dawn and dusk, whereas the camera traps give us a full day record, so we can see much more about the activity. We then also collect genetic data. We want to see how leopards are related to one another. Are there any issues with regards to the genetic health of populations? Are there problems with inbreeding, etc.? And to collect that genetic data, we ask the guides to collect scat, to collect leopard feces for us. This is the less glamorous side of being a field guide here.
But it's amazing what you can tell from even that kind of data, right?
It is incredible. So we can work out whose side particular litters. We can work out how related individuals are to one another. That's important within a spatial context. So the genetic data tells us a vast amount. And more recently now, we're starting to collect even the audio of leopards and use that in sort of experiments to see how individuals react to known individuals versus unknown individuals, and what again drives various parts of their population dynamics. So even though this isn't a dedicated research study, we are able to collect all those types of information that you typically would in a research study, but here using the field guides at a fraction of the cost and with a successful ecotourism operation. So it really is, we get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I mean, that is fantastic that again, we've spoken about this population of leopards and how you can use them to collect all this data. And I'm sure that all the data and the papers that you write and all that stuff goes into making important conservation decisions regarding leopards elsewhere across their range.
It does. It absolutely does. So Panthera is a conservation organization. Ultimately, everything we do needs to lead to us being able to better protect leopards and other cat species. So to give you some ideas, so one of the studies that we did here was are you able to effectively age leopards? So leopards they're an important species for the trophy hunting industry. They can bring in money to securing wildlife habitat, but it needs to be managed effectively. It needs to be based on sound science, and obviously because there are vast amounts of money that people would pay to hunt leopards, there is the incentive for governments to over-harvest, to have quotas which are too high, unsustainable. And so we, working with other scientists from the University of Minnesota, we developed a model whereby we could show that if you hunted leopards over a certain age, so it's actually males over 7 years old, regardless of how many males over 7 years old you hunted, it would have very little effect on population viability. That is great in theory, but to actually do this in practice, you need to be able to recognize what a 7-year-old male leopard
You
looks
have
like.
to be able to tell the exact age of the leopard.
Absolutely. And so there are, because there had been almost no, bar for Punda, there had been no long-term research studies of leopards. We didn't have known age individuals, but here most leopards are seen sometimes when they're a few days old, but typically within a few weeks. And so we know with great confidence when they were born how old they are. And so I reached out to guides if they could please send photographs of known age individuals, and we started looking at different cues, different phenotypic cues, so morphological cues on how one could age leopards. We looked at whether their ears got more tatty as they got older, whether they had more scarring on the muzzle, the color of their nose. But ultimately what ended up being the most reliable cue for being able to identify a 7-year-old plus male was its dewlap. This flap of skin underneath the neck. Male leopards start developing this, I guess, at about 3-4 years old, but it is only very pronounced. It's well developed by the time they hit 7, and so now, just to give you a case in point, the South African government has recently passed a law that hunters may only target leopards with well-developed dewlaps. So this is what has come out of guides taking photographs of individual cats here in the Sabi Sands, now is influencing policy at a national level in South Africa and is being picked up at sort of a continental level across Africa. It's likely to become the standard going forward. So that's just one example of how what would seem like very simple information actually translates into very effective conservation action.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. It's nice to see the progression of things and how it all works. So speaking about all the stuff in South Africa and Africa, I wanted to ask you about Asia and South America. So and Beyond has operations there as well. Does Panthera run similar projects to this with conservation initiatives in those regions too?
So we have conservation projects in throughout much of Latin America and Asia. So like I was saying earlier on, we do a lot of work in Latin America on jaguars. We're starting to develop a similar program in the Panthera, working with the different ecotourism operators there to collect information on known individuals, to be able to see where they move, who's interacting with who, how long they survive, etc. But there, the tourism industry is nowhere near as established as it is here in South Africa. So we're at the early stages of that. But again, we can use this. We can use the Sabi Sands project as a great roadmap on how to move forwards over time. I guess similarly as the ecotourism operators there are using the model developed here to run a better tourism operation. In Asia, we don't really run any of these type of, I guess, what would be termed a specialized citizen science project, just because many of the tiger sites we work on aren't really in the sort of key tourist areas. But I've been in contact with some of the scientists that in some of the better known tiger reserves like Ranthambore, they do this. They're doing the exact same thing. They're saying, okay, well, it's remarkable what you've achieved here in the Sabi Sands with leopards. We know most of our individual tigers. Can you share the different types of software that you're using? Can you just provide some insight on the lessons learned and how best to be able to derive rigorous scientific data from a ecotourism model. And so even if it's not our own projects, there's certainly we can use this model in a variety of different contexts.
Oh, that's fantastic. And there's pretty much no other way to describe the work that Panthera has done for big cats other than groundbreaking. I mean, the fact that it's being used in other regions of the world is amazing. And Beyond is obviously very happy to be able to be a part of it as well. So, I mean, I feel like we could probably sit here and talk to you all day about this stuff. It's so interesting, and thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and thoughts on all of this. So I would like to end on one other question. I wanted to ask you personally, what is your favorite leopard experience, whether it's from when you were a guide or now as the director of the leopard program? Do you have one moment that really stands out for you?
It's difficult. There's a lot of moments. That's a
good sign.
I've been very fortunate to have some incredible experiences with leopards and other cats in sort of the 20-odd years that I've been working on them. I guess many of the most phenomenal sightings, sort of what someone would say are traditional sightings, have happened here in the Sabi Sands, where you really do. You just see the most remarkable interactions between individuals. So multiple leopards interacting together, doing things that you would never expect of a solitary cat, and leopards making kills. But probably the most memorable for me was actually at Pinda, and it was in the early stages of the project there, and leopards at Pinda in those days were very shy, very skittish. We just
not that easy to see.
No, I mean, you'd basically see a spot disappearing off into a thicket. That was the best sort of leopard sighting if one was lucky enough to have one that you could expect. And after about a year and a half, there was a female leopard, a young female leopard, we named her Chinga at that time, that was resident in the north of the reserve. And she started to relax a bit. And I'll never forget going out in the early morning. It was, I don't know, 3:30, 4 in the morning. So it was before the guides had started going out. And there was a beautiful section there, the Mziki Marsh. And it's not leopard habitat. It's a big sort of open grassland, wetland system. And she was there, and it was mist coming up and beautiful, a lot of palms around. And for the first time, she just actually allowed me to sit there and watch her I had her for about 2 hours. And that literally was probably an order of magnitude longer than I'd ever sat with a leopard at Pinda. And she didn't do anything exceptionally exciting. She sort of lay around and got up and stretched and then lay down again. She was a cold cat, all hunkered up. But it was a sign of the fact that she was finally coming to accept me. She was finally... After a lot of hard work, was finally realizing that not all vehicles pose a threat. And soon we had other cats starting to do that across the reserve. And now Pinda's leopard viewing is fantastic. It's one of the best places in the world to see leopards as well as many other species. So I think for me, it wasn't any, I guess, remarkable behavior, but it was just that sense of satisfaction of seeing a very shy, relaxed leopard finally accepting us and being able to enjoy that and be privileged to experience that.
Well, I guess it really speaks to the relationship between humans and leopards. It can be a trustful one, and it doesn't have to be one of fear. And I think if you speak to any of the guides who've worked in these regions for any amount of time, it's not necessarily the most action-packed or hair-raising sightings, but it's moments like you've just described, where it's one-of-a-kind sighting, first time ever, and it's just you on, like you said, a beautiful misty morning on Pinda.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us today, Guy, and spending your time with us. We really appreciate it, and look forward to perhaps the next one in the future.
Thanks, Josh. No, absolutely. It's and again, just a huge thank you to all the guides here at Kirkman's, and to and beyond, and the other lodges that have supported Panthera. We wouldn't be able to collect these data, to make the advances in leopard conservation that we have and that we hope to continue to do if it wasn't for your hard work. So you really do. You all go above and beyond what is expected, and so we really are deeply grateful. So thank you very much.
Well, I think if you say to a guide you need to watch leopards for the rest of your guiding career, I don't think they'd be too sad, but it is only a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to and Beyond Fireside Chats, a life in the wild. Don't forget to subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. If you have any comments or feedback, or would like to suggest a topic you'd like to hear us talk about, drop us an email at firesidechats@andbeyond.com. We'd love to hear from you.